Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Public Safety Drone Review. We will get started in just 1 minute. I'm going to let everybody get into the room now. Thanks for being here. All right, I can already see a great audience here today. Thank you all so much for joining us again. My name is Miriam McNabb. I'm editor at dronelife.com. And with me, as always, Chief Charles Warner of Drone Responders, my co-host Timothy Martin of the Regional Training Center, and our guest today, Randall Warnes of ANZU Robotics. And I just want to a brief introduction for anybody who doesn't know Randall. Where have you been? But
Yeah.
Randall is a legend in the drone industry. He has been around at all of the major players. We have seen him from DJI to FLIR, Autel, Workhorse, and now with ANZU Robotics, a new offering in the hardware space designed to meet current regulations. We'll get into that later. But let's get started talking about the news of the day. So I had a ton to choose from today. There's a lot of sort of interesting stuff going on in the public safety drone space. I think things are really ramping up. The first one was a little bit discouraging. That was Cleveland police drones funded a couple of years ago, but due to just pure red tape, kind of going through just paperwork after paperwork, still not in the hand of first responders. Uh, Chief, uh, I'm sure they are not the only department that's experienced this.
No, this has happened to a number of different departments for one reason or another. Either things have been put on the back burner because staffing has been short, or funding has gone away, or they had a misstep with not doing the right outreach to the community. So there have been other things that have kind of stood in the way for people moving forward.
Yeah. Tim, what do you think about this? Randall, you must hear it from people, you know, all the
Yeah,
time.
it's pretty common, and the article kind of took a dig at the end. If you notice that they specifically said, "Oh, but these surrounding agencies have 15 drones and have been in service and up and running since 2017, and they're responding to all these calls." A lot of times, we're working with a department right now that has the exact same issue, and a lot of times, some of the slowdown is internal. It's command staff that don't like the technology or don't think the public will be willing to accept it at this point. So they're not willing to take that move to go forward with it. And here they ordered drone 2 years ago and just take delivery of them. And I'm not sure, it doesn't say what they ordered, but if they ordered a model 2 years ago, DJI has moved on. They're now at two versions ahead, and they no longer
Any
support.
manufacturer is
Yeah,
way ahead of where they were 2 years ago. Any manufacturer has made
and when you
strides.
have a supplier that no longer supports a certain drone model and that's what you're stuck with, then you got to make a decision. Do we continue with this model or we move on? So unfortunately, this is bigger agencies. You see this with more of the large, I mean, I'm talking thousands of officer agencies have these stumbling blocks more than the smaller agencies for sure.
I think it also speaks to the point that you have to sort of defend against some of the local drone laws going in where they may not be as informed, and people may not be aware that the drone law they put in 4 years ago is now having an impact on current operations that they didn't think of at the time. So I am a firm believer that we need to kind of look at local drone regulations very, very carefully to make sure that they are not going to prevent, services that would be very beneficial to the community later on. So, All right. We'll move on to other news. This is actually another piece about the ruling on public access to police drone footage. And we have talked about this on the show before. This is relevant to Chula Vista. And I think that Chula Vista definitely took a leadership position as, one of the first drone as first responders or the first drone as first responders departments. Uh, they really set an amazing standard for transparency and communication in my view. However, they're running into trouble because people have filed a FOIA request to look at the drone footage. They want all of the drone footage to be transparent. Um, and there's kind of pushback against that. So Tim, you have a sort of better perspective as a former police officer on what the issues are here.
Yeah, I think it boils down to like when we got body cameras, the amount of data that was being taken in. We didn't have a system in place to get that data released to the public under public records requests. So I think what it boils down to is drone footage is no different than any other evidence that we collect. It should fall within the guidelines of your department's public records request or retention. If it's evidence, if it contains evidence, then it's not released. And that's the fight here, is not necessarily whether or not to release the data. It's whether or not the data being released is of evidentiary value and therefore could be withheld. And I think that's the biggest issue. And it also goes, and I don't know, Randall maybe have some insight on this too. It goes to that whole debate of, do you record or do you not record? And what do you record? And do you only record evidence? So I think that's the key, is having a policy that says you shall record from takeoff to landing, I think is a really bad policy, in my opinion. And this is one of the reasons why.
So with the last article, just to I was smiling because I was debating whether this might be the tool needed as a butter knife, and I'm pulling out like Excalibur as a response to something like the Cleveland police situation. And this Chula Vista thing kind of comes to it as well, which is we as drone using people believe that there are lives saved and communities are better protected. And then there's beyond that in the industrial space, there's safety and efficiencies that are created there. We as drone believers already believe when we have opportunities to educate those that are not in the drone space, it's very challenging. And so over the past handful of weeks, I had an opportunity to speak to one of Congresswoman Stefanik's staffers, which was, both an honor, but also I think what came out of it is just like, yeah, Randall is who we thought he is, and ANZU is what we thought it was, regardless of, me doing full disclosure type stuff. But what I did want to say is that during that conversation, I made a weird analogy, which for some reason sticks with me as kind of dramatic, is that if in Russia or China, but lesser China, the cure for cancer was discovered, we would not care who discovered that cure. We would do whatever it took to get that IP to fund our own ability to manufacture whatever that cure is. We would not care about enemy lines at that point because it's about saving lives. What we believe in the drone space is that this technology is protecting communities and saving lives. And there are folks that are not educated about it, that truly don't care about it, that are making the most impactful decisions on its behalf. And I think that in both of these cases, the red tape should not keep your community from being safer than it should be or could be with existing technologies. With the public access of data, someone requesting drone footage for the purpose of mistrust or public perception of what data could be collected from drones could longer term impact the use of drones, because now you're no longer pushing record, you're no longer capturing things because you don't want to go through the whole process of maintaining that as evidentiary data, and some things that and obviously you guys know this more than I do, but the things that are evidentiary in nature then can't be a public domain. And so are you making communities less safe by these sorts of things? And again, it's education, and I think that there should be a better format for drone folk and non-drone folk to get together on these things. But it is just showing the challenge of taking new technology, regardless of its value and its worth and its safety, and bringing it into communities where they have an opinion, and that opinion really does guide how the technology is used, which is very different than public enterprises or
I
I
keep
think
wanting, go ahead.
I think leaving it up to your point, leaving this up to individual agencies and departments to make that decision, I think is wise.
Mm.
There are agencies that have a record policy on the body cameras where it's steering wheel to steering wheel, as we call it. Your body camera goes on the second you exit the car, and it turns off when you sit down in your seat. And then there's agencies that have a discretionary policy where the officer only turns on the body camera when it falls under certain guidelines, or they want to record, but it doesn't have to be all the time. So I think it's really how one agency does things is completely different than other. And I think the drone space is that way too.
I keep wanting to get back to this point that you made, Tim, which is that drone footage is not different than other footage. And I think that too often we're putting drones in these very separate categories when we already have rules about surveillance. There are already rules about what police can do and what they can't do. And in fact, they're, the most heavily regulated public service in our country probably. But so I'm not sure that we need these extra layers for drones that we already have for footage that comes from body cams, that comes from CCTV, that comes from all other sources.
Yeah, that's true. Same thing goes with searching. There's no, some states require search warrants to search and others don't. And drones are no different. They're a drone is an extension of my hand. It's just what I can do as a police officer and my powers. The drone can just be an extension of me. So that's exactly what you're just saying, Miriam. It
Yeah.
is, don't get caught up.
I always try to sort of tell people, if you could put a camera up on a pole and do this, you could do the same thing. So a lot of times it's similar. All right, moving on. This is actually in a little bit, it's too bad, but it's also encouraging because I feel that we're actually going to see this a lot. So this is a story about the Denver Police Department, who unfortunately suffered a sort of major defunding. They lost a lot of their budget. However, the department, kind of needing to provide those services within new limitations, decided to invest more in drones, and really kind of making the point that when you send a drone out on a first response because some neighbor called in, I think my neighbor is doing something, bad. I think my neighbor is having a fight in their backyard. I think whatever. And you can send a drone to see, is this anything or is this absolutely nothing? And we do not have to have an officer get into a vehicle here or leave something else important that they're doing. So Denver has decided, because as they say, and I'm quoting, it's a lot cheaper than an officer. Denver is restarting its drone program following funding cuts.
Yeah, I think to add to that, what we're seeing is that it allows units to go in service quicker. 25 to 30% of responding ground units are put back in service before they even arrive on the scene. Now, with the big change that's going to make the biggest difference is if we can get the technology in place that's affordable and can be replicated very quickly through FAA approval processes. That will take the visual observer off the roof. That will take the biggest cost factor out of that and make it much more of a great return on investment. So I think we're going to see that coming. And there's been a lot of movement within the FAA of starting to come to a realization that visual observers are not very effective. In fact, I think there's a Kansas State University report that's done in the Assure that's supposed to come out shortly, which I can't quote for sure, but I believe they determined the effectiveness of a visual observer human was about 800 feet. Not to mention maintaining your attention, not being distracted, and everything else that goes with it. So that's going to be a big change.
Yeah. And I mean, particularly in sort of varied climates and things, it doesn't really make sense. So I agree that is going to be a big change, and it is going to completely change the sort of cost equation. Um, yeah. Anyone else's
So the fact that you mentioned the cheaper than an officer, I think that there's also many things that officers can do that a drone can't do. You can't apprehend someone with a drone, at least not today. There's a lot of things that drones aren't going to do, but response to a scene for sure. And when if you look at the article that you're talking about, I think they mentioned that they're putting $100,000 as their seed fund for their drone program. What I believe, and I think that what we all believe, is that $100,000 should go a decent way for a drone program in its beginnings. That's not going to include things like necessarily going to include things like training and the other outside factors to running a drone program, like the visual observers and officers that are still part of that loop. But if that $100,000 is just for the acquisition of hardware, it should go a long way, and you should be able to respond to a number of scenes with what you're able to procure with that. But when you think about Denver as a municipality, it's not a small one. And so, $100,000 for a very large department maybe isn't that much, where some departments get by with a tenth of that on an annual basis for their drone program. So I think that we as drone believers, people in the space, we want to find a way that those dollars are maximized in the most efficient way possible, so that communities are serviced not by uh, insufficient technologies, as well as the number of units that are necessary to cover what you're trying to achieve, rather than send the one drone that we have, send it out in replacement of an officer here and there, because I just don't think that that repetition is ever going to get to a point where you're going to learn anything. You need to be fully committed to drone programs when it comes to public safety. I'm not speaking as somebody that is public safety, but saying I think that you have to commit, or else there's no point in a trial of a drone program within an agency.
And
Right.
Randall makes a very good point. I'm sorry, Miriam. Randall makes a good point, because you these will never replace officers. Especially you take a place like Denver. I'm not a big snow person, but I know that it snows there a lot, and weather is a big factor. So when you talk about these drones and in certain regions of this country and the world for that matter, they're not flying all the time. They're limited to weather issues and all that. And there's also like Randall said, the boots on the ground. You have to have officers that can respond to these calls. It's an enhancement. I think the best way to put this is not it costs less than an officer, because that insinuates that it will replace officers. I've been doing a lot of flotation device training with lifeguards recently, and they are, no offense to them, but they are like super threatened by it. Here, this flotation device is getting out to the swimmers faster, and it's not even the whole idea isn't that you do it during normal business hours when there's a bunch of lifeguards on the beach. It's when the graveyard officer is working patrol and he's got a drone with a flotation device, and there's a swimmer that jumped off the pier or something. And that's very common in my city, is that you have people jumping off the pier, whether it be intentional or not. That's kind of the big push with flotation devices and drones. It's to enhance it, but you're never going to replace lifeguards. You're not going to replace cops on the streets.
And I think it's important to remember, when you're sending a drone out, the drone can't do anything. It can't stop anybody from doing
Yeah,
something. It can't arrest anyone. It can't calm anyone down. It's just there to say, do we need the officer there? And, with the same with flotation devices, that flotation device isn't going to rescue someone. It's not going to get them back in. It's just going
exactly.
to keep them alive till you get out there. So, or possibly you don't have to jump in. That would be good too. But we do have a comment, which I think is relevant, and this is from my friend Paul Rossi. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hi.
Regulations are loosening, but it is driving up the cost of U.S. systems capable of DFR. He is making the point that if the regulation for beyond visual line of sight or to remove that visual observer is going to call for detect and avoid systems or a drone dock or whatever, then that it is a much more expensive technology solution.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
We're hoping that we're
Absolutely
seeing
right.
technology come in with a much lesser price as we go forward. But here's the other part to that too, though. What's important about this detection technology is that as we're moving forward and advancing with BVLOS, this detection equipment can also have multiple purposes. So it can also be important for deliveries. It can also be important for advanced air mobility. So if you look in that direction, it actually helps to fund the advancement of beyond visual line of sight, beyond just public safety.
Yeah.
Departments are going to have to commit to bigger budgets. And I've said this for a long time. The early adopters of drones, I'm talking 2014 through 2018, it was the driving force was the one or two people in the department that wanted a drone program, whether they were the officer level or the chief of police. And it was like, rob Peter to pay Paul. We're going to take this money here and this money here, and we're just going to buy these drones that are very affordable at the time. And even the comment just came in about, the cost of a thermal drone back in the day was you couldn't afford it. Now you can get a thermal drone for a decent price. So department budgets have to increase, and if these departments want the capabilities, especially of DFR, they're going to have to commit bigger budgets.
And that doesn't even address the issue of training in general that we're not seeing being done on
Yeah.
just regular drone programs. Forget DFR for a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so moving on, because I feel like we could probably spend the next hour on that one if we wanted to. Police1.com says early use of drones in SWAT situations can. Oh, sorry, I got background coming in. I don't think that's for me. Okay. Early use of drones in SWAT situations, definitely we're seeing data that significantly improves outcomes. Not a surprise there, but all that data is great data. This one I thought was also very interesting. So New York City has a technology called ShotSpotter. It is a sound monitoring system. And so they're starting to integrate drone response with the ShotSpotter as kind of instead of limiting it to when a 911 call comes in, they are instead saying also, or when ShotSpotter indicates that there may have been a shooting somewhere in this region, we will then deploy a drone to see what's going on. Was there a shot? Was there not? Right? Because ShotSpotter's not perfect. It's a auditory monitoring system. What do you guys think? I think this is like a great step in sort of Internet of Things that's kind of getting more sophisticated and smoothing out those workflows.
I think so. I didn't look at the article until I'm looking at it now, and I'm trying to determine whether ShotSpotter, I know what ShotSpotter is, and whether ShotSpotter is trying to enter the drone game with their own hardware component to go along with it, or if they're trying to open up that software, basically it would ping some sort of network and you connect into that network with your drone program, and that's how it's deployed. Because I think that the last thing people need is another bespoke product that is for one
That's
thing.
Yeah, I think
I'll go with.
I think they're working with providing coordinates of the shot location
Yeah, I
to the
didn't get
drone.
the impression they were, although who knows.
There have been some
Yeah,
there have been some departments that have been trying to use this already. The problem has been the reliability. And in New York City, what's going to be kind of interesting is right now almost everything they fly requires an SGI. So it's going to be interesting to see how they're able to launch that automatically without those approvals in place with such dynamic airspace.
Right. Yeah, on the article it says ShotSpotter is integrated with this drone in a box, but I don't know that drone in a box, and I don't recognize the drone, and so who is doing this thing?
Whose
If
drone in
it
a
is,
box is that?
yeah, and if it's New York City, if this is NYPD, again, the last thing we need is another thing that it's just like, oh, we've now dominate shot spotter. So any community that has this has to use this specific drone. And now we're talking about a drone in a box solution that who knows what it's going to cost, who knows how safe and reliable it is, who knows if they'll stick around for a long period of time. And this is our challenges as drone manufacturers, is really like making sure that people are informed of what they're purchasing and that they're not needing to purchase more than what they have to because of what Tim said, where budgets need to increase. And until we see, budgets to the point that they can have bespoke things for everything, it's kind of a one size fits all. So yeah, I just was curious if you guys know this drone that they're showing, then maybe I'm just off base, but I don't recognize it.
Yeah, theory and reality are different than the concept coming to life. And really, this is already being done by Flock Safety. They have the Raven system, which is their shot spotter version. And I think the important factor of this is as police departments get these serious crimes, the work and the arrest is usually made after the fact. To be able to get there and make an arrest on scene, sometimes you get lucky and get the car driving away or the people, but most of this stuff is done after the fact through really hard work and investigation. So having what the shot spotter technology is there for is to capture the gunshot sound and then activate the flock cameras in all of the surrounding areas. So you get the suspect vehicle either coming or going from the scene. And then you can backtrack and ID. So being in the air, whether it be a drone that launches or the flock system where you have a bunch of flock cameras in the area already, because quite frankly, this is going in high crime area. This is not, Huntington Beach will never use shot spotter because the frequency of shootings is not like in certain neighborhoods. So it's a great concept, but I think it's we'll see.
And a lot of it is a combination of technology. So we're seeing departments with the drone technology, DFR, Live 911, the flock cameras, and so when you combine all those things together, you start having a more effective system.
That's I think you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly the point, is that when you put the tools together, that's when we're going to really start seeing exponential benefits. Okay, we have a couple of comments. Paul says he thinks that drone in the box is Nightingale. He put in a link. Also, Todd May says the tech of send a drone to a coordinate and focus a camera has been around for a while. To point exactly, it's the autonomous approvals that need to happen. I think you're right about that. And to your earlier comment, I'm just going to fly by this last story before we get into ANZU robotics, because I know everybody really wants to hear about that. But we did have a story on our list this week about taking a regional approach to drones to save money, which is, there was sort of a county approach to leveraging the drone technology in order to make it more affordable for all of the departments in the locality. And certainly, I go back and forth between Boston and a much, much smaller community out here in New Hampshire. And here in New Hampshire, a lot of small towns working together could benefit from leveraging fewer aerial vehicles. So and this comment from Tim Scott, very apropos, good point. Isn't the value of putting the pieces together a case for standardization of interfaces so that you could update or upgrade while minimizing the cost of change? Okay. All right. Do we have time for one last one, just to point this out actually to anybody who's interested? Because, while police drones outnumber fire drones, apparently it's sort of 75% law enforcement and 25% fire. However, during fire season, that 25% is really critical. There is an article on fire rescue that is more of a deep dive on kind of how the technology has evolved. Really interesting read for anybody who wants to see it. I know Charles put up a list of the articles that we discussed today, very relevant as the fire season unfortunately gets underway.
Yeah, I'll just say that we found that when we looked at our study, we have found 50 use cases now in public safety of how drones are being used. We have 7 different use cases in wildfire fighting alone. So
yeah,
it's huge.
it's huge. And you know, to Randall's earlier point, it's life-saving. It's not, you know, it's not tiny benefits. It's really life-saving. So all right. Now we're going to move on to the second half of our program. Thank you again for being with us, Randall. Appreciate it. We have known each other for a long time, have the greatest respect for you in the industry. You know so much about the industry and the technology, and you are now CEO of ANZU Robotics. So tell us, I understand, you know, for anybody who hasn't yet heard of ANZU Robotics utilizes a tech transfer agreement to bring a familiar airframe to you, but it is manufactured in Malaysia. The software is powered by US company Aloft. So it's designed to kind of meet those security needs while still offering a cost-effective and familiar functionality, familiar airframe. But let's
Yeah.
hear it from you.
Yeah, so that, I mean, you pretty much covered it. If
That's
we
it. We're done now.
if we consider the opportunity that we would have as an industry to say, look, the challenge we're having is a country of origin and a company of origin problem where it's limiting what drones can be purchased and what drones can be used for public safety and beyond. Florida being kind of the first mover and the biggest mover where you know, I still am of the belief that I don't think anyone in China really is watching day-to-day footage of wildland fires or learning anything, or that when you're protecting a community, you're flying in any area that isn't covered by a Google map that you couldn't find anyway. So I'm not sure what the data concern is for public safety in that regard. But when we have found ourselves in a position where Chinese manufactured drones or drones specifically manufactured by DJI have become challenging for the scalability and the growth of drone programs. I was given an opportunity as a veteran in the drone space and with relationships that go into my former years at DJI, my 4.5 years at FLIR as a partner of DJI, making the thermal sensors that went on the Zenmuse XT, Zenmuse XT2, that there was an opportunity to license DJI technology and manufacture it in a way that would, I guess, rid the quality of the technology and the price of the technology of those stigmatic factors of country of origin and company of origin. Now, much of the last 6 weeks since we launched the company on April 17th have been explaining what we actually did, what actually exists behind the scenes as far as relationship with DJI, any control, any ownership, all of those things, which I'm happy to express here as well. But what anyone should know is that ANZU Robotics is an American-owned, American-based company with American software pointing data to American servers that are AWS East servers in Virginia, owned by Aloft. We license the technology from the world leader of drone technology, where there are millions of drones flying. They are at a price point that is affordable, what people are wanting to pay. They are safe and proven with millions and millions of flights of those platforms. We manufacture them in Malaysia because it keeps tariffs down. Sourcing componentry was still relatively easy to be done there. But ANZU Robotics, 7 weeks in, this is ANZU Robotics 1.0. We intend to evolve not only by the variety of platforms that we put out, but the way that we approach these legislative hurdles. Right now, our technology is not NDAA compliant. We're not green, we're not blue, and Tim and Charles both were a part of a conversation about how important blue and green is for public safety and beyond. That won't probably likely extend here, but we could be different. We could be an entirely different DNA as a company in a year from now. likely the licensing agreement between ANZU and DJI as an exclusive thing will continue on, but that does not preclude us from making changes in magnitude that will suffice for or continue to comply with the ever-changing regulatory environment that we're in. I think I mentioned that I talked to Congresswoman Stefanik's staffer, and also had that New York Times article thing that I didn't feel reflected well what we're trying to achieve. If you haven't read it, I think educating non-drone people, I would hope to say, look how important drones are. And when you take away this tool, you are leaving a lot of people jobless, you're leaving a lot of people without other options, and you're leaving communities less safe. None of that came through. It was really Randall's a one-man band in his garage or in his basement, and running this thing, and Congresswoman Stefanik doesn't like it. That's basically what the article said. I believe that we have put in so much work to try to serve the drone industry in the way that the drone industry has asked to be served for my 10 years in it, which is give us something that just works, give us something affordable, get us something that you will back up, and that when we have problems, there's after sales support. Give us something that stays in the air, give us something that has quality data with sensors that we know and rely on and can trust. All of those things are present with ANZU Robotics just because we license DJI technology in their hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D that they've spent to support our community, the drone using community. But the reality of geopolitics is that we're in a situation where Chinese manufactured drones are threatened, and DJI specifically is threatened. So I stepped in with the opportunity to do something about it, but it is truly a living organism that's taking in feedback from every source we possibly can pull in, so that the next version, the evolution of ANZU, is really going to be, able to withstand all of these changing tides.
So, Randall, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
The big question comes out now, as Tim and I were talking earlier for the show, is that one of the big concerns was that at any given time, DJI or other manufacturers, for that matter, could geofence everything in the United States and put them to the ground.
Yeah.
So will that be able to be controlled to where that won't be able to go through you? In other words, you can control
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so basically in the licensing agreement back in, let's say, August, September timeframe, we were given a firmware and a SDK to build off of, and that firmware was a snapshot in time and pulled into Aloft's AWS servers, and it's housed there. That's where it's modified, that's where it's edited, that's where it lives. DJI can't access that. Nobody could access that to turn anything off. So basically it is now IP that's integral to the operation of our drones, and there's no outside control or modification of that. We also built in no geofencing, so the module that would exist for geofencing we pulled out, mostly for the purpose of being like, now there's no way that anyone is tracking the GPS coordinates of the drone while it's in flight. That's not a mandatory thing, so that it's irrelevant if you're flying in controlled or uncontrolled airspace. We don't want that data. We don't want to know for the purpose of keeping a diversion or a distance between DJI and ANZU Robotics, but we don't have geofencing today. That module is out, so there would be no way to preclude or add new fences within that ecosystem because it doesn't exist.
While we're talking about the specific controls, I saw a video the other day of someone in Canada that flew a search and rescue mission way up in the mountains. It was, I don't know, he blurred out his AGL on the screen, but he said he had to go through different processes to get government approval to fly that high. Then they had to get the DJI to unfence that so they could go higher than 400 feet. And this kind of goes to a question in the chat. Is there flight limits that are on this, or is it just unlimited altitude and all that stuff?
No, I mean, we do basically the mentality of ANZU plus the mentality of Aloft is that compliance is very important, but that compliance is in the hands of the pilot, and we are not forcing any of that compliance. So whether it is altitude or it's distance from controller, flying beyond visual line of sight, or where you're actually flying, none of that is decided by the manufacturer just because it's us. You're pulling our product out of the box. That is in your hands as a pilot.
Do we
So
have
so
another?
it's oh, sorry, go ahead, Miriam.
Nope, I was going to get to the next question. You go first.
So it's not a DGI, right? So it's not a DGI in true form. It's not a NDA blue or green if you want. Who is your target audience? Who's going to be buying this drone for a little bit more expensive than DJI and a lot less expensive than a say one of the original four blues?
Yeah. So we announced the company 7 weeks ago. In that first 7 weeks, we have seen who the customers are going to be. And they're folks that feel like their hands are tied, and they're only tied by a single sentence in a line of restrictions, which says source country of origin cannot be China or company of origin cannot be DJI. Honestly, they're like, look, this suffices. This solves that problem in the near term. Those internal, whether it's an enterprise level company or a public safety agency in different challenge states, those regulations could change. But I don't think that they'll change to say country of origin Malaysia. I don't think they'll change to say American company licensing technology from China. I think that we've gotten through the process we've gone through has protected a lot of the reality of any impactful changes. What I believe is we're not a perfect company today. We're not scratching the itch for everybody. I know states like Mississippi are extremely challenged, where states like Arkansas are less challenged. States like Florida are very challenged with the language that they have. But our first customers are the initial adopters are going to be those that just say, I can't buy another Chinese drone, period. This is not a Chinese drone. I am not a Chinese person. I am one of the four owners of the company, and they are all Americans, et cetera, et cetera. So we've gone down the line of trying to make it so that it's not about a nuance, it's not about a loophole. It's about truly this could have been done years ago with other technologies. Teledyne FLIR licenses a Taiwanese drone to make the Cyrus. That's what it is. It's a licensing agreement in which they contract manufacturer in the same way. Nobody has beef. But because I'm a 7-week-old company, and for people outside the drone space, they don't know me, would this have been different if I were Amazon, Microsoft, Teledyne FLIR, Axon? Would it be different? Probably. So I have to go through extra steps to make sure that people understand the story and understand all the work that was done to achieve a licensing agreement that does sanitize a Chinese drone and a DJI drone at the end of the day.
Okay, so just to get to a couple of questions, this says Aloft is a great team. They are a great team. For anyone who doesn't know, Aloft was one of the original developers of the Before You Fly app. They have processed more than half of all of the Lance approvals that ever took place in the US. In fact, it's like way more than half. Sorry, Aloft, I don't have the exact fraction at the top of my head. But it says, can you expand on the differences between Aloft software releases and DJI?
Yeah. So, like I said, snapshot in time, firmware, and SDK. We are continuing to build on that SDK with the Aloft app that is native to our system. So in 2 weeks from now, we're adding pre-programmed photogrammetry flight paths like zigzag patterns on a polygon, that sort of stuff. That's us adding additional capabilities within that SDK. And then the firmware we assume will be unchanged long term. So we started shipping last week, and that was after we received validation from a third party. It's a penetration test to inform us whether data was going anywhere other than the endpoints that we selected, which are Aloft's AWS servers. To change the firmware, let's say DJI comes out with some novel thing for a Mavic 3 Enterprise. For us to decide to implement that into an ANZU product, we would have to go through that penetration test again, because it would be an entirely new snapshot of firmware that we would take in, modify, but we couldn't guarantee that everything is unpenetrable unless we tested it again. So that is a huge barrier for us to want to make those incremental changes as DJI does. With our technology being based off of 2-year-old mature drones, we feel like there's not likely going to be any major safety updates. So it's not going to be that batteries are failing, drones are, flying away, whatever. And as long as they're not safety, unless they're massive, we'll keep the firmware unchanged and just build on the app as any app developer could. And just to hurry and throw this in as well, because we do have an SDK, we're working with one large photogrammetry company today to be the first on our SDK, just to make sure that the process is smooth, everything works as they expected, and that doesn't increase or introduce any new cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But we intend to have an entire ecosystem of software partners on our platforms within the upcoming months, building on that SDK. So the ways that you're used to flying drones and capturing data, you'll be able to do with our products in the foreseeable, very near future.
Two other questions. One is scalability as far as being able to deliver drones on a larger scale, and the second is service on the drones.
Yeah, so I feel pretty confident that we can manufacture whatever demand that we see in the first few years. I would say that I feel confident we could be the largest manufacturer of non-DJI, non-Autel drones in the world if we had that sort of demand and we could meet that. I've been quite public that the number of drones that are arriving in the United States over the next 6 to 8 weeks are in the multiples of thousands, and how we forecasted that out, that should suffice for a period of time. So scalability and our ability to manufacture and the availability of products when you need it shouldn't be an issue. One thing we also did when we launched this is included a care program with every drone that's purchased. So many companies have their own care program. In this case, it's ANZU Care, which covers incidental or accidental damages along with just the manufacturer warranty. The reason we did that is that we figured that in the first year that we need to figure out what issues we were having, who we are as a manufacturer, and what the needs are of our customers. So we figured in the short term, we're going to be likely hot swapping all of the repairs that come in, either through manufacturer warranty or through the care program, so that you're basically getting an entirely new drone rather than a repaired drone, to keep that after sales service and turnaround time high. Because we know that early adopters coming in with a new company, regardless of my tenure in the drone space or regardless of the basis of the technology we're using, that you need to know these other aspects, which are you going to do what you say you're going to do? Am I going to be stuck with a drone and it takes months for it to be repaired or to be looked at? We wanted to eliminate all of those concerns by putting out a care program standard and making it so that we're basically just receiving the drone and sending a drone out, rather than looking through a bunch of logs and determining whether yes or no it was user error. That's irrelevant because of the care program protection. It'll basically be a small deductible or a manufactured warranty, and we feel pretty comfortable standing behind that. We'll be atop the service expectations within the drone space because of that approach.
Okay, I just want to make one clarification. So Teledyne FLIR actually does not license Cyrus. It does manufacture in Taiwan, but it's a custom drone.
I'll wrestle you on the nuances of those.
Custom drone. So they do it, it's made for them for their specifications.
Sure.
Just okay, so supported in the US, software in the US, manufactured in Malaysia. Some of the parts are also manufactured in Malaysia. Is that correct?
Yeah, so sourcing was one of the biggest challenges as far as trying to become what we wanted to become in a short amount of time. We knew that with the maturity of the Mavic 3 Enterprise and Mavic 3 Thermal that our drones are based off of, that to go to market with that platform, we'd have to do so sooner than later, or else we're going to be talking about an entirely different platform. So, and then also with the regulatory environment and everything, we feel like we didn't want to sit on this for a few years and then come out with something. We wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So we went down the challenge of sourcing componentry sourcing componentry outside of China as much as possible. We were able to do some things. We were unable to do other things. Future tense, we expect that we will do much more to the point of becoming NDAA compliance and scratching those itches as well. But that really was just a time to market constraint. we knew that there would be customers that would say, look, you're just covering my country of origin issue, like I mentioned before, good enough for me. And those are the customers we're approaching today. If someone can't purchase an ANZU robotics drone because of something we haven't done, we totally understand, and we're just not the right drone for that entity today. But yeah, so we source some more stuff out of Malaysia than would be otherwise. But one thing that is important to note is we don't source anything from DJI. So everything there's some similar sources, I would say many similar sources where the componentry comes from, but we're not beholden to DJI stock levels. So if DJI is trying to make 10,000 of something and they need 10,000 of their components, the only place we're going to be impacted by that is going to the same supplier and trying to get access to it. But we could have already, purchased ours, or it could be smaller quantities or whatever, rather than having a gate through another manufacturer that says, oh, we can only allocate you this and this. So we do source, again, some things out of China, but nothing is sourced directly from DJI when we manufacture.
So I think it would be useful actually if all of us could clarify, and I'll get it out there, and then if you guys want to tweak this for accuracy. But I think what people need to understand about the kind of regulations is that there are two sets of regulations. There are federal regulations, and then there are state and local regulations. What Randall's talking about is that depending on the wording of the specific regulation that you're trying to comply with. So if you are a government agency trying to buy a drone for use in your government agency, then you may need a blue UAS or something like that. However, if you are public safety, or you are a utility company, or you are a drone services provider, and your state has some regulations that said if you're working for state customers or you are a state entity, these are the regulations. Those regulations often say can't be China or Russia as a country of origin, or it says it can't be a covered entity, which is something that's on a list, which is essentially China and Russia and a few others that that would seem obvious to anybody. Malaysia is not on the list. Taiwan is not on the list. And and so there's kind of multiple regulations, but if you are not a government agency and you're complying just with either the internal regulations of your customers, right? Sometimes those exist. In general, what we've seen is they say can't be Chinese or Russian in country of origin.
So Randall, can I, there's two or three questions that are all kind of similar in the chat, and I was wondering if you could address them. Number one is, the first question is it made at a DJI factory in Malaysia? Is it a DJI factory? And the second question is the same thing. How do you know the Malaysian company is not owned by China? And then the last question deals with country of origin legal framework. Are you, I clarify, I think with the, maybe clarify that you are or are not licensing from DJI, they're just not made in China. Is that correct? I think there was some confusion there.
Yeah, so I will try to answer all those questions in a painting of the scenario. So we licensed technology and went out and found contract manufacturers that manufacture technology that felt like they could take this on. Now, when you have high tech technology like these drones are, they're not hand screwed by a person. There's machines that build these. So we have a contract, we have a licensing agreement from DJI. We have a contract manufacturer in Malaysia. The contract manufacturer in Malaysia is not owned by DJI, does not make DJI drones. However, they do have a relationship with DJI because they do lease machines that build these drones and have some sort of contractual relationship that keeps them access to the things that are necessary to build our drones for the duration of our licensing agreement. They are not DJI. DJI only has the ability, only has that single negotiation with that contract manufacturer that we selected to build these drones. Your second question, I guess, if it's the question that's here about components, again, we source similar components. We source, in some cases, the same component with the same serial number from sources that DJI gets their components from. We do not source anything from DJI. So if you call up microchip company X and you say, I need the 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, that could be the same 1, 2, 3, 4 that's in a DJI product, but we're getting that for ourselves. That has been part of this negotiation. Part of the licensing agreement is that we would have access to know where the sources of those components come from. But again, DJI is not shipping us boxes to our contract manufacturer where they open it up from DJI, and that's where we get our parts from. And then what was the third question, Tim, about the country of origin?
Yeah, I think that was kind of it. Is dealing with country of origin as far as the the parts are country of origin
Yeah.
would fall under that category.
Right. So
Not the company of where it's, but the actual part. So if you go with the
correct.
definition of NDA compliant, it's not going to fit.
Correct. So when we talk about the made in Malaysia, Malaysia has a standard in which they need to meet the amount of work done, the amount of source components sourced for that product need to be a certain level before they'll put the stamp made in Malaysia on it. In the same way that in the United States, if you just ship a bunch of stuff from China and put it together here, you can't put made in the USA on it. There are different standards for different products across the board in technologies, and country by country what is required to put the stamp of made in blank on that product. Our drone is made in Malaysia. We have done what is required to have that acceptance, that international acceptance of where that product's origin is as a manufactured product. However, when we talk about changing the sources of the technology, I've mentioned before, like the thermal sensor is very difficult for us to source outside of China, where the source comes from for the DJI product, because you're talking about an entire re-engineering of a payload, which is then an entire re-engineering of the gimbal, which is then an entire re-engineering of the product as a whole. We decided, look, let's go with what we have now and not have the ability of being NDA compliant, partially because of that sourcing issue. But in the future tense, we're going to be looking a lot further ahead of where we can source these things in tandem and how we can develop them in tandem so that we do have a variant that can be sourced entirely out of China or entirely out of China for the things that matter when it comes to NDA compliance.
I think we've
Okay.
seen a lot of the arguments shift from being a security issue here recently more to an economic issue of people saying, well, maybe it's not so much about the security, but it's about how much money is going back to China. Would you say that dramatically changes by the licensing is how much money goes back to China?
Yeah, I mean, like what I've said publicly is this is not a necessarily a money-making endeavor for DJI. They do multiple billions of dollars a year, even if ANZU Robotics is as successful could be. And nothing further, like, we don't pay royalties to DJI, so nothing further is being transacted from ANZU directly to DJI. The only thing that they're getting in some way is monies from our contract manufacturer for the leasing and other things that exist for their relationship. Even if 100% of the profits that we we pay to our contract manufacturer did go back to DJI, we're talking about a pretty insubstantial amount of money as a whole, right? Even if we did our maximum volume that we would expect, because there's a significant loss in what we're licensing that technology for versus what they could go to market and sell a product. There's still money that is being transacted in that way. And again, this is version 1.0 of what ANZU Robotics is. There could be that it's like we can't structure things in the same way going forward, and we would reevaluate that and structure it differently if that's necessary. But yeah, certainly DJI does have some money being paid for their, years and years of R&D, but it's insubstantial, and it's not directly from ANZU. Once we got this licensing agreement in place, there's no further transaction or negotiation. Yeah, and one quick thing. So James in the chat also mentioned this Think Awesome report that was put out by some well-known drone hackers, and I think it's worth bringing up and having an opportunity to talk about it really quick. I have said, almost from the beginning, I have said, this is DJI technology. On the first days, I said, we license technology from a world-leading drone manufacturer because This wasn't a story about DJI. ANZU Robotics was a story about ANZU Robotics. And you could see how easily it turns into a conversation about DJI when you start saying DJI. So in the first weeks, I wasn't saying it. But Kevin Finisterre and Conrad and the folks that have been hacking DJI drones since 2017 and proving that they have a passion for that process, I don't resent or regret that that report that they put out existed. What it showed is that, yes, this is based on DJI firmware. Yes, this is based on a DJI SDK. We've said that from the beginning. There was a question of what is a custom SDK. A custom SDK means there's no other version of that SDK in the entire world, just as if I put a custom paint job on your car, and there's no other paint job like that in the world. It's a custom job, it's a custom SDK. We have full control of where your data is going. It is going to AWS servers that are owned by a loft. That's really what the story is. Where is your data going? We paid a third party, which the guys that wrote that report would say, these guys are not well-known drone hackers. How could they possibly penetrate something that they don't know? Well, I'm not in that business. I just paid someone to do a penetration test. They said they can do. It's up to others to poke and stab and jab it at their qualifications. But what they did is they took a drone static in front of them. They took a drone up in the air flying, capturing data, and they were unable to take data off of it, redirect data somewhere else, or see data going anywhere other than AWS servers owned by a loft. That is what we have said from the beginning. That is what I can attest to with any ANZU Robotics customers. Your data is going where it's supposed to go and is not being shared with China, is not being redirected to China, it's not going to DJI, it's not going to DJI servers. We needed a third party to validate that. I couldn't just say it and that would be good enough. But I look at that report and I go, yeah, we kind of been saying this all along. And the evolution of ANZU will only improve. We take a lot of criticism for a 7-week-old company, for sure.
We
It's the
could go on
drone
for another
industry.
hour, I think, probably.
We could. We could. Randall, thank you so much for being here. Everybody had a lot of questions about it. Really appreciate you coming on and explaining what you're doing. Best of luck. We will see you out there. And it is 4:02. Look forward to seeing everybody on the next episode of the Public Safety Drone Review. Thanks, everybody. We're going to end the recording, which also ends the webinar.
Bye.
Thank you, Randall.